Hello, welcome. We are still adding a lot of people. We're going to get started in just a minute. Celeste, will you just give me a thumbs up when everyone's in? Okay, great. So hello and welcome. I am Erica Anderson and I am the project manager for the Help Is This True Facebook group. That is a collaboration between ASU's News Collab and Spaceship Media. And this session is going to be recorded. I just wanted to give you all a heads up at the top here. If you don't wish to be recorded or have your faces seen, please just turn your video off. And I just want to go around and introduce a few of the people here from ASU and Spaceship, and then I will introduce our amazing guest from First Draft. So Eve, I'm going to pass it to you if you're ready to go. Sorry to just join.
I don't need to say much. I'm just really glad to be here. I'm the co-founder of Spaceship Media, and it's been really fun to work with our colleagues at ASU and build on their awesome media active class. So thank you all for coming, and hope this is really useful. I can pass it on to Kaylee Lapara, who's a member of Spaceship's team.
Yes, hi, I'm Kaylee. It's nice to be here. I'm a moderator in the Help Is This True Facebook group, and I'm really excited that we're doing this. I love First Draft, so welcome to everyone.
And Maya from the Spaceship team.
We don't hear you, Maya, or I don't.
Well, we'll come back to you. Christy, would you like to go?
Sure. Hi, I'm Christy Roschke. I'm the Managing Director of the News Collab at ASU and part of the instructional team for Media Active, for those of you who have participated in the course. And just want to echo what Eve said about loving to partner with Spaceship, and also echo what Kaylee said about loving First Draft. So we're excited about this conversation today. And I will go ahead and turn it over to News Collab co-founder Dan Gilmore.
Hi there, Dan Gilmore, co-founder. I'll turn it over to Celeste.
Thanks, Dan. I'm Celeste Sepsi. I'm one of the Media Active instructors, and for those of you who have been through many of these with us, I'm sorry that you're hearing us introduce ourselves for what seems like the 1,000th time. And lastly, it's Quinlan's turn.
Hi, I'm Quinlan Shaughnessy. I'm the community assistant or communications assistant, and I'm also one of the teachers at the Media Active course.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. We are super excited for today's presentation with De'Ara Towns, who I feel very lucky to have gone to grad school with, and also she's the sort of person that when you're in class with, like, you're always measuring yourself against her and her note-taking ability. So I feel like I did well in grad school trying to compete with De'Ara and losing. But she is an investigative research and community engagement lead at First Draft's US Bureau. We graduated together in 2019 from the Social J program at the Newmark J School, which is the CUNY University, the City University of New York. But she has an undergraduate degree in marine and environmental science. So she's done a lot of work in and around climate change and anything related to science. And as the community engagement lead at First Draft, she's spent the last year and a half developing, strategizing, and guiding the US 2020 Student Network, which means coordinating and supporting and training output between student volunteers and the organization's community of newsrooms and journalists. And it is totally okay if you don't know the ins and outs of First Draft. I'm hoping De'Ara is going to tell us more about what they do and how they are trying to save the world, basically. So take it away, De'Ara.
Oh, Erica, it's been a while, but oh my gosh, like, oh my my gosh. So yes, thank you so much for that introduction and for both Spaceship Media and ASU's collab team for putting this together. Misinformation, as we know, has been a pretty important issue in 2020, and I'm going to go ahead and jump into sharing my screen so I can explain more about what we've seen in terms of misinformation. Okay, there we go. So everybody can see my screen, fantastic. So yeah, this presentation will cover a lot of what First Draft has been researching this year, which is how online misinformation jumps from social spaces into real life spaces. And it's not the first time that this has happened in history, but it has been a little more prevalent this year more than others. So my name is De'Ara Towns, as Erica said, and I have been an investigative researcher, mostly focused in the beginning in climate change, and then fully into the coronavirus pandemic, and then straight into election misinformation, which, as we know, has been basically the entire year when it comes to those who have been either in online spaces, researching, or in journalism. And I'm accompanied by Isabel Perry, who is First Draft's community engagement intern, who's been working with us for also most of the year. So at First Draft, as a nonprofit global research organization, we work to empower people with knowledge and understanding and the tools to build resilience against harmful, false, or misleading information. Because a lot of times what happens in online spaces is there are questions, people are looking for answers, and it's not always that the answers they find are accurate. And unfortunately, they do become susceptible to then sharing that information with their loved ones. And so what we try to do is equip people with that knowledge as well as familiarity with ways to protect themselves from those mistakes. And yes, we are a founding partner in the Google News Initiative. Okay, so throughout the presentation, feel free to drop questions into chat. I know I saw one that talked about my X-Files poster. I've had this sucker for like 10 years and I'm so proud of it. Somehow it has not ripped, so. But yeah, it kind of does, you know, fill in that gap when it comes to, well, why was the X-Files so popular? It's because it's about what we don't know and what we think we know, and then how those collide, which kind of brings us into information disorder. So information disorder is broken down into 3 categories. It's the difference between misinformation, which is a mistake. It is disinformation, which is generally a deliberate issue, and then malinformation, which is seen as something that is more malicious. I will take the time now to ask Erica if I am cutting it close to time to let me know, because I am a talker, so I will do my best to wrap it up as fast as I can. But it's important to know the differences between these things, because misinformation is a mistake. Like my dad posted in our family thread about how martial law was coming down in March because there were concerns about lockdowns and quarantines, and that this was another instance of the government trying to take control of our daily lives. He was concerned about what he was seeing online, what he was reading online, and shared that information with me. Unfortunately, it came as a giant SMS block text. I'm not sure if you guys have seen that over time, but when the pandemic launched, a lot of messages were copied and pasted, and people were sharing it with each other because they were concerned. In actuality, there were people who were behind those text messages deliberately trying to get people to share it because, you know, an emotional trigger, fear, anger, despair, grief, things that get you to react emotionally is usually what gets you to share misinformation. And so people who are behind those text messages were trying to do that, to get you to share and to disrupt our normalcy. And then we get to what is called malinformation, which is malicious use of accurate information. So a lot of times this is seen as like revenge porn. It's also doxing. So when you have your address posted online and it definitely shouldn't be there, that is malicious information. So where we tend to focus are the first 2 categories, mis and disinformation. So briefly, I'll jump through the Trumpet of Amplification, which does underline the strategy used by most bad actors or agents of disinformation. So if you guys aren't familiar with the anonymous web, those are places like Acun, 4chan, Telegram, places where you don't have to identify yourself or verify your identity. it gives you the opportunity to have those X-Files like conversations without worry of being ridiculed or you know, people start talking about you in your family groups and stuff like that, saying that you're saying, you know, quirky or crazy things. It gives you that space to share misinformation that you don't necessarily want to get out there. Unfortunately, some of that misinformation or that chatter does make it into closed networks. So that would be your WhatsApp groups, your Facebook Messenger threads, it's your SMS, you know, family threads, things like that, where you want to like, hey, did you guys see or hear about this? You want to have a conversation with people that you know, people that you are comfortable speaking with. Then there are times where that information then goes into your conspiracy communities. So for people who are followers of the QAnon conspiracy theory, a lot of times they had legitimate questions and concerns. We'll talk briefly about the Save Our Children issue that popped up in September. But where that came from was a conspiracy community that was talking about these, oh, sorry, I could have swore I quit out of that app. But yeah, so just where these conversations were being had were in anonymous spaces. And then it came out into conspiracy communities, which then brought us to Facebook, you know, Twitter, Instagram, where people who had legitimate concerns found inaccurate information or disinformation and then started chatting about it on the public social web. And we know if it's on Twitter, it's only a matter of time before it's on the mainstream news, because unfortunately Twitter is seen as the front page of social media. Even though that's how Reddit likes to showcase itself, there are more journalists on Twitter than there are on Reddit. So, misinformation in 2020. Basically, the room has been on fire since March, if not February. If you can remember, back in February, we had our primaries with the Democratic Party, and there was the instance of, I believe it was Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who had this disinformation story that spread showing newspaper clipping that said that he used to, I think it was beat up dogs or something like that. It was some horrible story, but it was a fake news story. It wasn't a real story, but because of the different disinformation type tools that are out there, one being a newspaper clip generator. So yeah, it started out pretty bad and it's ending pretty gnarly right now. So where first draft comes in is with rumors, misinformation, and conspiracy theories that started or lived online and then transitioned into real life. So election misinformation. One of the two main ways that misinformation about election spread was through the use of content that was used to fit in an agenda or a narrative. So a lot of times it's either real information or content that's really new, eyewitness media that gets posted to Facebook. The information that's shared is then taken and then used to basically frame the situation in a way that helps either a political party, an influencer, a politician, and it was pretty prevalent throughout the election. So one of the more popular ones that happened more so towards August was all these different narratives about the USPS, because the Postal Service was already facing issues back in April when it came to funding and support. Because it didn't have the funding it needed to meet the demands of the election, it was just, as they say, a powder keg waiting to blow, but it really was, because we knew they couldn't meet the demands of the election. So misinformation actors slid in and started spreading these real stories of a postal worker who was charged after absentee ballots were found in a dumpster. This isn't new. We've seen postal workers kind of make these mistakes or purposely dump, election mailers because either their route is too long, they don't have enough time, it's overtime, underpaid, whatever the personal non-election related issue was, it was then taken out of context and then used to frame, well, all postal workers are working on behalf of Democrats to ensure that Trump loses the election. Or on the other side, postal workers are trying to make sure that the election doesn't work, so Republicans, and more specifically Trump, will win, since Democrats were going to be the ones who were going to be using mail-in ballots the most. So it was, again, we saw it coming. We did our best to inoculate, but it still didn't stop the use of accurate content in a misleading way. And then you have what's called the visual graphics, your memes, your viral images. This is a great example of how the U.S. Postal Union, or the American Postal Workers Union, their leadership endorsed Joe Biden. But there are people within the union who they could vote for whoever they want to. Just because the union endorses them doesn't mean every postal worker endorses them. But that didn't stop disinformation actors from creating a very easy, cheap to make meme that makes people question the integrity of the postal service with what, 15, 16 words? So it's been a pretty impressive yet cheap way for misinformation to spread by, again, using real information. And so then we have how election misinformation spread from social spaces to those offline spaces. So the Democrats, or at least left-leaning people who wanted to make sure that whatever happened with the USPS, we have to make sure that the integrity of the election is protected and maintained. And so the organization created Protect the Results, and then they created different events to then showcase their support. So they went out to different cities across the United States. They did it before as well as after the election to showcase their support for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's win. At the same time, we had supporters of Trump who were gathering in those swing state locations. This is one in Orlando where supporters were doing the opposite, saying, well, actually, we need to count every vote, and we need to make sure that no one's stealing the election, because from their point of view, that what they read online about we can't trust the mail-in ballots was enough to push them to meet in person, despite the whole we have a pandemic right now. People were still going out because they were inspired, angered. They felt that they couldn't trust the election. They needed to do something about it. Again, it's those emotional triggers that brought people from those online spaces into a real world scenario. And then this example on the right is one that I believe Isabel gathered earlier today in her research about how this is a confusing one because there's nuance, but the Democrats have been pushing for, mail-in ballots and everybody get registered for the Georgia runoff. In that same instance, I believe yesterday, there were some Republican or GOP influencers who were saying that you can't trust mail-in ballots. And because these two senators in Georgia didn't win, we shouldn't go out and vote for them because they should have won in a landslide. There are users who, on both sides of the political spectrum, who are using this to their own agenda. Again, real information to then push their own narrative, their own agenda. In this instance, it's a Democrat-run account on Twitter using the Act Blue charitable donation fund website to then push for additional billboards to argue that people should not be voting for these two senators. And on the other side, you have a Republican user who's now calling out this account, saying this is a Democratic pushed agenda to stop the vote. We got to stop this, stop the steal sort of narrative that's developing. So again, this billboard, did it exist? Would it have existed if the voter fraud narratives about the Postal Service, or even just about the integrity of the election in general, would this billboard have existed if those events didn't happen prior? It's hard to say. Well, okay, maybe it's not too hard to say. I could probably jump to that conclusion, but we need more data to confirm. So now we have protest misinformation. So protests obviously have been a pretty important and critical issue in 2020, both with the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, to the Save the Children issue, to now Stop the Steal and the Million MAGA March. Again, despite the pandemic, people are still out here physically trying to express their emotions, whether it's anger, pride, support, whatever it is, they're still willing to use the information and how it makes them feel online to now come offline. So one of the biggest issues during the George Floyd protests was the viral spread of eyewitness media, where you had all these videos, all the pictures, the TikTok, Snapchats, Insta stories of all this content of people saying, hey, this is what's happening. And unfortunately, a lot of times in newsrooms and researchers, they will see this content and you got to get a story out or you have to respond, and you may not have enough time to verify if that content is representing what the caption says it is. And unfortunately, it has led to a lot of misleading narratives that developed. One, not an example in this presentation, but part of my research revolved around the reopen lockdown groups or the anti-lockdown, excessive quarantine Facebook groups, all these groups that popped up on Facebook when governors started enacting these mandates. And in the beginning, they were focused on constitutional rights, liberty, you can't tell me to shut down my business. And then it gradually morphed into, well, if they're gonna force us to wear a mask, or they're gonna force us to get the vaccine too. And then by June, when, again, all these people out here, despite the pandemic, protesting the death of George Floyd, you have these same groups who are now saying, well, if they can be out here without masks, even though if you look at the content, there are people who had masks on, they were making the conclusion that the pandemic wasn't real. So again, accurate information, the viral spread of eyewitness media being used to fit somebody else's agenda, or at least giving false context. Because one of the major arguments was the media is not going to tell you that the pandemic isn't real, but you can tell because of the way they're covering the George Floyd protests, because they're not talking about the pandemic anymore. They're not talking about masks anymore. Even though that wasn't always the case, you can look back and see that there was a different frame between those lockdown protests and the folks who went to the Michigan Capitol with their guns compared to the people who were out protesting for Black Lives Matter. So there was a media portrayal that varied between the two that then propelled an emotional reaction in those lockdown groups that again brought them out because they didn't see that the pandemic was being covered in an accurate way. Which then brings me to this example, the Save the Children and the QAnon conspiracy theory. So again, this was born in a conspiracy theory group, but we know that there are real life foundations, organizations that are trying to stop human trafficking. It is a real issue. These two communities were not connected, but joined when everybody had to start operating online. QAnon was using the Save the Children hashtag, while these other communities, these other real human trafficking organizations who were trying to push back against that, they were using the same hashtag. And the QAnon conspiracy theory was able to what we call kind of like keyword jack or hijack their keywords to then manipulate the results, the search results that these groups, the real legitimate groups were looking for. And then they found QAnon conspiracy theory content. And the more that they were searching to find more information, to get an understanding of what the surroundings in that environment was looking like, the more they became entrapped in QAnon conspiracy theories. So this content boiled into these communities as the QAnon folks were saying, you know what, let's get an event going. Let's see if we can get people out here. Whether these folks really believe it or not, they built Eventbrite events to get people to come out to Save the Children rallies. And it worked. People showed up, they were there. Not all of them had masks because again, everything is a conspiracy theory when you start finding yourself involved in these dis and misinformation environments. You start questioning everything, which again, being an X-Files fan, I appreciate people who question stuff, but at a certain time, you do need to rely on a baseline of fact and reality. And the more you question without acknowledging what your baseline standard for fact is, the more likely you are to do something such as show up in person for an event during a pandemic. Yep. Okay, so I would be disappointed if I did not mention the power of TikTok. If you're not familiar with TikTok, it is a platform based around I guess short clip videos. Some are a little bit longer, but generally it's a favorite platform of the younger generation that is really starting to pick up in older generations now. And one of the ways that you can, again, that keyword hijacking, you can do this, use the same concept throughout different platforms. So this individual chose to use TikTok to showcase how she was going to RSVP for the Million MAGA March, just like they did back in June when Trump had his Tulsa rally, where they thought they had 1 million people who were showing up. In reality, it was a bunch of TikTokers and I think it was like the Korean pop band, all their fans just jumped in and confirmed on Eventbrite that that's where they were going to go, that's what they were going to do, and it blew up their numbers. Same concept, different place. It's just now people are showcasing it on TikTok versus say on Twitter or on Facebook. It's another platform that's been used to deliver mis and disinformation, or at least to showcase that people are willing to do something to the next level to push their own narrative or agenda. Right, so yeah, this was the Million MAGA March that happened a little less than a month ago. Again, people who are willing to show up in person for things that get an emotional trigger out of them based off of mis and disinformation. And so yeah, more examples from protest misinfo that went from social to offline spaces. So when this one didn't get as much notice, was it Stop All Tires hashtag? It was a push by truckers who were going to stop all the trucks from moving. We're going to stop society, the world, the country won't know what hit them, and we will force them to redo this election because they need truckers in order for this country to run. And unfortunately, when this happened, I won't say unfortunately, but when this happened, it kind of blended into the Million MAGA activity. You can see the dates, November 11th, the Million MAGA March was November 14th. So whether they got the attention that they normally would have received if this didn't coincide in the same time frame as the literal Million MAGA March, maybe they would have got more attention, maybe more truckers would have jumped in on it. Hard to say now, but just in the day or so after the Million MAGA March, there was all this coverage about what the mainstream media wouldn't cover, and that there were people who went to this march deliberately out there with their cameras trying to see where the mainstream media was, or where the Black Lives Matter protesters were, or the Antifa protesters were, who were purposely trying to look for this because they heard online that these agitators were going to be at this protest. Cool. So health misinformation, more so like a second string problem this year that was noticed by either media or researchers, not intentionally, but unfortunately. There were tons of concerns and confusion over COVID-19, where it started, how it got here, who's at risk, who should have a mask, who shouldn't, what does a lockdown entail, do I have to lock down? And then now vaccines. We have all these new vaccines just coming up finally. Say 6 months ago, this would have been great news. Today, not so much. Like, it's great, but there's a hesitancy to it. And one of the questions that we have to ask is, are people hesitant because it's science and it's early science, new science, we want to take your time with it, or because they don't trust it? And it's leaning more and more so that people aren't as trustworthy of the science. So unfortunately, Bill Gates, like at least 5, maybe even 10 years now, has been a supervillain in the anti-vax community. Everything that this man says, does, posts, talk about, it's always this under label in anti-vax communities that says he's doing this for nefarious purposes. It's either he's backing these pharmaceutical companies, or they're backing him, so he's getting a financial profit from it, or he's doing this because he's part of the New World Order. All this stuff has been just brewing in these conspiracy theory communities. And at the start of the pandemic, media, researchers, policymakers, government leaders, everybody was turning to Bill Gates, the WHO, trying to get accurate information without necessarily understanding what was going on in the conspiracy communities and why these anti-vaxxers were really good at what they did, because they know how to take things that are concerning to people. Doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. You could be anti-vax and believe in the libertarian freedom of choice, constitutional right, or you could be on the left and have the more like liberal choice, holistic health type approach. So this was one of those issues that politics doesn't matter. This is about, again, my body, my choice. And a lot of people saw when media, government, policymakers started turning to these entities as an example of the larger conspiracy theory. And you could draw a straight line, unfortunately, to how this misinformation just continued throughout the year. So again, TikTok came back in the sense of it's not just a platform for kids to have fun dancing. This is a great platform to deliver quick bites of misinformation. Just like memes are, so are quick videos. And then you had this issue of imposter content, where we know every day news was new, if not every hour, news was new about the pandemic. So as more information was coming out, sometimes it was hard to catch false information, such as British Prime Minister Boris Johnson being dead. Not true, but this was an imposter content. Somebody took their logo. You can even see the Twitter handle, Breaky, BBC Breaky. If you're not checking those details, it's real easy for information like this to slip through that gap of accurate and credible information, and people will pick it up and go with it. Because as we know, unfortunately, some folks read headlines only. I am guilty. It is what it is. Sometimes you see it and you want to share it. And that's what makes, misinformation, especially in health, so dangerous, because people are not reading the details. Because it's complicated. I don't know about you, but if you've seen a recent scientific report and looked at the methodology, I also am like, wait a second, what is this? And I know science, so it can be a little difficult when it comes to accessibility to these details. So that's why health misinformation, while it was second to political misinformation, is far more critical, because these are people's lives now. Oh, right. And then this last fun one. Satirical content, probably something we should avoid when it comes to health misinformation. This was from the Science Post, which I believe is a real news site, but probably shouldn't have gone with this headline, which said scientists already hard at work on 6G technology, considering which disease to make it cause. Because at the start of this pandemic and now still throughout, 5G has been seen as a source of where the symptoms of COVID-19 came from. If I'm not going to say if these media journalists had taken the time to look into the history of 5G, it's always been a villain of health and anti-vaxxers. It's always been a villain before it was 5G. It was 4G before. So it just keeps evolving as we go. These baseline misleading narratives have to be understood as we go into, say, 2021, because these have been pretty consistent, whereas political misinformation, protest misinformation, not as much. Okay, so real quick, I'm going to dive through, how am I doing on time, Erica, before I dive in? Okay.
We have 27 minutes. You're good.
Woo, all right, let's do it. So, the 4 psychological theories that help shape our understanding of misinformation. So, when you're online and you are, scrolling through Facebook, or you're on Twitter, and you see a post about, say, vaccines, and it says the Oxford vaccine was just approved in the UK for distribution next week. Sounds great. The next post says the Oxford vaccine will be distributed next week. Okay, love it. The next one says the Oxford vaccine is only 70% effective. Okay, well, it's being delivered next week, right? The next one says, should we trust the Oxford vaccine? It's only 70% effective. You're like, wait, that's getting delivered next week. The more and more you hear misinformation, the more, just even with real information, accurate information, the more likely you are to remember it. Because as humans, we tend to need that repetition for those items to stick. And when it comes to misinformation, if you are in an online space that does not have accurate information, that is, a conspiracy community, and that conspiracy community isn't like, the basement at the coffee shop. It's, a Facebook group that you join that used to talk about, healthy vaccine choice for children. But now it's talking more about, how vaccines aren't safe because it hasn't been tested, and they're not going to tell us about the side effects, and why should we trust the doctors because they get funding from pharmaceutical companies. The more you are involved in these communities, the more exposure you have, the less likely you are to accept information that counters that, because you're constantly seeing and hearing it. Whether or not you are consciously believing it, your brain is taking in this information and holding on to it. So that's one way that misinformation takes shape in our brains. Number 2, the overkill backfire effect. So overkill, it is similar to familiarity with the more you hear it, the more you're going to believe it. But overkill is more so if you're in, say, 3, 4, 5 different groups, where one is Facebook, and then you have a subreddit that you subscribe to, you have, your friendship thread, right? Your thread of friends. And then let's say you're also following this person on YouTube. If all of those accounts are talking about how we can't trust vaccines right now because they're not telling us the whole truth, or this is a way for the New World Order to control us. Whatever the conspiracy, the misinformation, the misleading narrative that you're seeing, if it's happening across all 4 of your main threads that you check for, social activity, for news, if you're seeing that information over and over again, it's going to stick. And it will feel as somebody on the outside like overkill, but if you're the one in the center of this hurricane, you're not going to recognize that the information that's surrounding you is in fact inaccurate, because again, you're used to it, you're surrounded by it. Why are you going to question it? So number 3, the worldview backfire effect. This one I think is the most difficult to counter, because it's making you as the individual who has become susceptible to misinformation question your own reality. And I was watching the X-Files last night, and there was one instance where Scully had asked Mulder, why are you choosing to believe the lie? Because the lie is the misinformation in this case. It's the vaccine it's not that the vaccine isn't safe, it's the vaccine is new. They have done testing on it and they're releasing more information about it. So there is a lack of information, but that doesn't mean that the vaccine isn't safe. But if you're constantly being told throughout the entire year that we can't trust our government, that the governor is pushing these lockdowns, because they want to make sure that the franchises of McDonald's or whatever makes money. Yes, these are real narratives that popped up, but over time, especially this year when everybody's been locked inside more or less, sticking to the same content and the same sources, your worldview has shifted, and now that is your baseline reality. So when Scully asked Mulder, are you really going to believe the lies when this is reality? The man flipped, like he couldn't take it. And the reason is because it's forcing you to step outside yourself and look at the facts. And a lot of times people are like, you know what? You have your facts and I have mine. And you're like, well, actually, you have an opinion. You don't actually have facts. But for some people, and a lot of times it's not a deliberate pushback, it's just, this is my reality. This is how I choose to live. I choose to not get the vaccine because I don't think it's coming from a good, intention or an organization that I can trust. It's like, you want to align with them, but at the same time, you have to also have that conversation of where you're getting your baseline information is not based in fact. And that is a difficult one for a lot of people to come to terms with when you're the one who has to come to terms with it, because it's you that has to make that choice. And then the last one is missing alternatives. So this is what's known as information gaps or data voids, data deficits, where let's say I wanted to Google right now COVID-19 vaccine. I'm going to get a mess ton of information, and because Google and Twitter and Facebook, everybody's been labeling or filtering content that hasn't been verified, you're going to get accurate information out, which is great. But if I had Googled COVID-19 vaccine in April, I would have gotten stuff like, anti-vax links. I would have found Facebook groups that talked about how the polio vaccine damage the society in Pakistan. You may get information about how the Ebola vaccine led to, a civil war in West Africa. You would have gotten all this information that was not accurate because it was misleading with its context. That yes, polio vaccine, it did not go well over in Pakistan, but that's because they had misinformation. And the Ebola vaccine did not do well in West Africa, but that's because they had domestic issues that then fueled their misinformation. So it's all the context that would be missing. And that was what was happening in like April, in May, when people were looking up, well, when would a vaccine come out? There wasn't much, scientific data, reports, or media stories that were explaining this, because it was the information gap. We didn't necessarily recognize that these are the questions that people were having. Maybe because, US media and researchers were more so focused on the primaries and, Biden and Trump. Like, it was an important news story, all of the election, but this information was infiltrating more so because people didn't have the resource. They didn't know where they should be getting accurate information. Okay, so just a few resources. So First Draft has a dashboard insights page. This is more so for like researchers, journalists, policymakers, stuff like that, but it is 100% open to the public. And it allows you through Inauguration Day to have access to some of those things that I was just discussing. Well, what are people seeing online? And are they asking, you know, questions that we should be asking as well? In this case, my job with the Dashboard Insights is the Google Trend searches. So for example, today I Google searched the election or Google Trend searched the election, and there was the queries that were coming up were the suitcases in Georgia and the video of ballots being stolen. These are the questions that people are having just in the last 24 hours. So then you would ask, well, are there stories out there for these people to get? If there aren't any stories that are answering those questions, that is what you would call an information gap. So again, we'll have this up probably through Inauguration Day, maybe a little bit longer if there's more stuff happening around Inauguration Day, hopefully not. And then briefly, do I still have time to go through some social media verification stuff? Yay!
Yes, please. Yeah.
Great. And any questions so far that I could answer? Are we doing solid?
We're good. I think people are just listening. And I think the more you can talk to us about the social media verification stuff and tricks that people can do kind of themselves,
Cool.
That'd be great.
Awesome. So disinformation, it's quick, easy, and cheap to make. So always my favorite go-to. How do you guys think this was made? Because I can tell you right now, this is a real screenshot of a real post, but not necessarily by this person. So this is why a lot of times First Draft will say don't trust screenshots, because if you go to any social page, or any page, honestly, media page, your own homepage, if you right click on this page and you hit view page source, it allows you to then edit the content of that page. So yeah, let me see if I can show you real quick, yada, 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 only because it's one of my favorite things to do, and shows you why you should not trust. Okay, there we go. Like I said, screenshots. So you guys see my page right now? Yay.
Yep.
Okay. Really? He doesn't pop up as the first? Okay. So let's see. It's fine and easy. Oh my God, he's been retweeting all day. Okay. Great. So let's do a right click. Is it view page source? No, it is not. It is the other one. It's one of the two, 50-50. Okay. So you go to inspect page source. So what I'm going to do is show you in real time, again, why you should not trust. So I found the tweet. It's right in here. So this allows me to edit the actual post, and then I can take a screenshot of it. If I can find his giant tweet. So that's the whole page. Okay, this is usually a lot faster, so I do apologize. But yeah, so it's basically just to show you that when you are trying to confirm that, hey, you know what, I saw that this influencer, say President Obama, said this such and such thing. If it's a screenshot from Twitter or Facebook or anything like that, I wouldn't trust it. And it kind of goes into the issue of deep fakes and was it shallow fakes? Yeah, where it looks real, it could be real, but we don't really necessarily know for sure. You know, now I'm annoyed that I can't find it.
I think you just had it. Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm right in there, but I'm trying to find the actual text of it.
So then
usually I choose one that doesn't have links because it really explodes the whole breakdown here. But in any case, yeah, you can.
When you do that, when you change that, it just changes it on your screen, and then you can change then you can take a screenshot of it, right? It's like Correct. You're not actually editing the post on Twitter.
You're not. It's a static internet web page. So when you take that screenshot, it looks like 100% looks real. But when you hit refresh, it goes back to its original content.
Wow.
Yeah, it blew my mind the first time I saw it. I was like, this doesn't wow, we are doomed as a society if this is what's happening. Like, okay, great. Which again, shallow fakes, deep fakes. I know Jordan Peele did one of Obama a few years ago, and like my head exploded because I really thought it was Obama. And then when you look at it, you're like, okay, it's a little iffy. But that was a couple of years ago. What's happening now? So I'm going to go through what's called the 5 pillars of visual verification, which again does kind of blend in with that screenshot of, you need to understand, or at least hope to understand, are you looking at that original piece of content? There are different ways that you can look up, say the person that you're looking at, that post that they did, is that post really from that person? So that would be the source. When was it posted? Where was it posted? Like, was the content that they captured actually from where they said it was? And then one of the more important ones that I don't necessarily think applies as much, say, to research and media before digital journalism came about, is motivation. Is why was this post captured? Why was this video recorded? Why did they share it? What's their personal motivation behind it? So everyone can do this one. It is a photo verification plugin that you can get on Chrome. I don't believe you can get it on Safari, and I think you can get it on Firefox. But it's called the Reverse Image Search plugin, and you can search it up on Chrome. And what it allows you to do is right-click any visual post online, and you can use Google, Bing, Yandex, which I believe is, it's Russian, but I think it's location-based, 10i, and then Baidu, which I believe is Korean, which just gives you more options for databases of searching. So what it allows you to do is determine if the video, the screenshot of the video, the profile pic, the eyewitness media that's being shared in that Facebook group, is that really what the person is saying it is? Another way to visually, or at least digitally verify what you're seeing is what's known as digital footprinting. So this is, again, we have a picture here. We can do a reverse image search on her picture. So if we look and let's say her LinkedIn pops up, and then let's say she is a journalist and she has a Substack. Okay, great. That picture shows up. In fact, there's other pictures of her where it looks like it's her. This is definitely her picture. Is this really her though? So she says she's a B-cell immunologist. Okay, so A, what is that? And then B, how can we confirm that that's actually who she is? So we would Google her name, we would Google her title, and we would put those together to see if those two things come up anywhere else outside of this Twitter profile. So if it doesn't, that would make me, immediately question it, because if she really is a scientist or a researcher, where's her work? Where are her research papers? What organization or institute or academic, department does she work for? Stuff like that. Yep, there you go. Is there something to back this up? And then, yeah, can you find their contact information? Because fun fact, LinkedIn has a lot of your information on there that's public. So if I were you and you haven't visited your privacy settings on LinkedIn recently, I would, because when I searched it just in January or February, it had my email, my phone number, and my previous address to this one just on there. But I had it on there because I was using LinkedIn as my resume. So I was like, oh my God. So you may want to visit that. The next one is, again, her handle. So mostly because I like consistency, I use the same handle across all my platforms, all my profiles. It's all Curious Scout because it's simple and I like it. Is that what she's doing though? Is the antibody_lady also her account on Instagram? Does she have a TikTok? Is she on Snapchat? Does she have a second Twitter handle that perhaps isn't an underscore and is in fact a dot? Change it out and see. Great way to verify if the person that you're following or the post that you want to share that perhaps could be misleading or makes a pretty blatant statement. Do you want to share content from somebody who isn't who they say they are? And then, yeah, this is a really important one. When did they join? Because a lot of times, if you have somebody who joined 2 weeks ago and they have 3,000 followers, I'm going to be a little suspicious of that. But if they've been on since, January 2012 and they have 12,000 followers, I'm like, yeah, that seems pretty you know, what do they do? Oh yeah, if they work in research, or if they're a nonprofit organizer, chances are, yeah, their followers rather have probably ticked up over time. That seems organic, because what you're trying to do here is prove the authenticity of the account that you're looking at. All right, what was this one? Oh yeah, helps if I click. Oh yeah, what kind of content do they post? Are they just reposting, you know, Alex Jones the whole time? Or are they, you know, reposting scientific reports that's related to the career that they say they do, or the field that they work in? Is it, you know, hyper-partisan content? Is it inflammatory content? That might give you an idea that maybe this person isn't the most authentic or the most genuine, and maybe you shouldn't retweet them. Or the content that you're seeing in that Facebook group that somebody else is sharing, that could give you the opportunity to be like, okay, well, now that I've looked at their Facebook page and I see that they have no friends, but they have all of these posts about the election was rigged, maybe they're not who they say they are. And then geolocation. So when you, especially with protest information that comes through, or rallies and marches and stuff like that, so often there's content that gets reshared that says, oh, look, this is what this is. And it turns out, no, it's not. So some of the more important things that when it comes to visual verification, when you're, say, in a Facebook group and someone says, hey, look at this, what are they wearing? Who's in the picture, right? Are they near buildings, or their signs, or are they in uniforms? Is there a business? Like, what is going on in this photo? And now that you have those things, that checklist, now you can apply it. So this was a news story that was being recorded. I think it was in Boston, but let's say you didn't know, right? You're just looking at this and someone says, look, the local election officials are talking about how Democrats stole the election, or how Republicans are trying to overturn the election. And, you know, this official says yada, yada, yada. How would you confirm, like, okay, well, when did this happen? Well, they're all wearing masks, so it has to be this year. They're kind of in coats, so it's probably a little chilly. You can see right here that there's a couple of microphones on there from different media outlets. Maybe you can Google those outlets, try to see, you know, well, where do they report from? And then you could just Google, you know, news stories and those call numbers for those media stations. And that can give you some ideas to what this is, especially if you do a reverse image search and you don't get a result, because not every search result for a reverse image will give you a result that you're looking for. So you want to have different ways that you can confirm what it is that you're looking at. And then let's say, like, on this building, there was like a partial logo or something, or the title of the building. You could type in, you know, those letters and try to say, okay, well, I think this is Boston and that says Department of something. Let me see if I can look up what those buildings look like and if this building matches that list. And that can help you confirm. So real quick, oh, go ahead.
Here we had one question. Celeste, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. So we got a question from Jane, and I think this is something that a lot of people have probably wondered. So she says, as a former journalist, I try to approach things from the middle when watching, listening, reading stories, which include words saying something is proven to be false. Wouldn't it be fair to say President Trump says that there have been conspiracies in voting, yet we have investigated and found no such content, for example? And she says, wouldn't this increase Trump supporters listening to the news and be a better way for the media to approach the issue?
That is a great question, and B, one of the things that we've been trying to grapple with, at least in the early half of the year. So when it comes to trying to convey, you know, what conspiracy communities or followers may think in a headline or in a lead, it's better to lead with the truth. To say, with that example, claims of voter fraud proven false despite pushes from Trump, you know, legal team. Because even if it goes against their worldview and they're not exactly happy about it, it's better to lead with the truth than to lead with the lie. because you, in addition to your Trump supporter audience, you also have audience who are in the middle. You're like, well, I know that mail-in balloting was being pushed, and I don't necessarily think that it was the best thing to do, but I also, voted by mail, so I hope it worked out. Like, you have, a spectrum, a range of audiences, and it's worse to focus on appeasing one and ignoring those who are more likely to adhere to what you're saying and the information that you're trying to convey, versus knowing the ones who are already pushing back against you. And I think one of the hurdles in 2021 is going to be figuring out how do we communicate facts to communities that are not receptive. Because even in that example of the news story, you could 100% go with the one that's kinder to the folks who believe in the claims of voter fraud, but that's not necessarily going to get them to trust you. They're like, yeah, okay, great, one story, they did it, finally. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're like, I'm going to recommend this newsroom all the time because they did that one story. An hour later, there could be a story that comes out that they disagree with, and they're like, we're done, we're not reading them anymore. Like, it doesn't take much for people to push back, because any example that they use to prop up their belief, they're going to jump on, even if there's that example of finally we got one. Cool. Were there any other questions, or yeah, okay, great. Awesome. But that was a great question, and it was a hard one. Yeah, go ahead.
Just have a couple minutes left, so I just wanted to let you know. And if anybody has any questions at the moment, feel free to put them in the chat.
10-4. Okay, so this was an example from our training manager, who's based in London, who she's in love with TikTok because she definitely flagged it first as one of those platforms we need to look out for. And I'll just play it real. Oh, okay, I guess I can't play it. Really? Okay, there we go. Yeah, we'll keep it short. But it says, what the media will not show you. This was outside the Walter Reed Hospital. At least that's what this user claimed back when Trump was in the hospital with COVID in October. So Laura did some digital verification. So she checked out their account. She did a reverse image search on this logo and found their profile. They were on TikTok as well as on Instagram, but she downloaded the video. She watched it several times, and she looked for those digital verification like hints. So she saw what the building was in Walter Reed, and then she looked at the actual video that the person posted to see, well, is the video represent that location? Turns out sure didn't. It was a video from Staten Island of a supporter, or no, a congresswoman or someone who was where people had gathered for a rally that same day, I believe. So yeah, I believe Isabel has the link for this as well, but this is First Draft's verification toolbox. This allows you to, again, like download those plugins. There's one, a reverse image, but for videos. Not my favorite, but when it does work, it's great. If you are interested in like, well, what's going on 4chan, instead of actually going into 4chan, you can use these two websites called 4chan Search and then 4stats.io under the anonymous web tab in the second column. This allows you to bypass the mess of some of those anonymous sites and just search with the keywords, or let's say somebody said, I saw this on 4chan, and you want to see it there for yourself without going onto the website, you can use stuff like that, which is pretty helpful. And then one of the things I always like to double check is if you are curious as a researcher or a journalist about what people are seeing online, Facebook Ad Library is a really good resource. It's free to access. It's just like, you got to access it, you got to want to use it. But it's a really good way to see like, well, what are people being shown in, this anti-vax community, or the anti-mask folk, or, just to get an idea of what people are looking at. So when you do see these conversations happening in either closed groups or you're seeing on your news feed, you're like, well, I definitely saw that in a Facebook ad, so I'm pretty sure that that's where they're getting that argument from. And it gives you a chance to have additional insight when, let's say, you're trying to have that conversation with a family member. All right, so some First Draft resources. We have an SMS course, 2 weeks, and it gives you some tidbits related to the US election and that misinformation. Well, it is now a little dated, the insights itself and what to be on the lookout for, kind of what we covered a bit in this presentation, are delivered to you at the time you choose throughout the 2-week period. And it's available in English and in Spanish. You can scan that cute little QR code if your phone is at the ready. Otherwise, I believe Isabel can drop that in as well. If not, I will share with Erica later. And then we have from the US side, a recently developed and launched pre-bunk newsletter. So this is specifically for, well, it's for everyone, but it's for folks who are outside the media and research like field, who do want to stay informed about what in God's name is happening on the social scape. Because oftentimes what we see at the beginning of the week is a problem by the end of the week, and vice versa. If we see something taken up on Friday, chances are it might be a thing by Tuesday. So what we try to do is give folks that heads up that we saw that, God help us, Biden, was playing with his dog, fractured his ankle. And we saw like day one, like, okay, we already know how this is going to get played out. This is how we can cover this. And we can give people a heads up of, yes, he did hurt himself. It is what it is, but that doesn't mean he's not fit for office, right? And then the argument on the other side of that was the Biden administration is already more transparent than Trump's administration. It's like, well, Biden's not president yet. So I guess maybe Trump doesn't have to, like, as president. So we try to give people a heads up when it comes to stuff like that. And then for journalists and researchers, we also give you the opportunity for daily insights through a private Twitter account and then through our Slack community, which definitely was popping during the election. I think we've all taken like a general exhale, and it'll probably kick up again in January, especially as these vaccine distribution strategies and plans start coming out and people already are starting to question if we're going to have mandatory vaccines, because that's how they did it back in somebody else's country and somebody else's time. These are things we want to look out for. So if those are items that interest you as a researcher or a journalist, feel free to jump in on that. And yeah, any questions?
Thank you so much, De'Ara. My question was going to be like, what next for people, like if they want to dig in a little bit deeper. So thank you for bringing up both of those. The SMS course is really, really helpful, and we will post all of these links in the Facebook group for people to follow up. So I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. If there are any last minute questions, please just chime in. If not, we'll see you in the Facebook group. And thank you, De'Ara, so much.
Me.
Yeah,
It was
thank you. It was
genuine
awesome.
pleasure.
Okay, well, thank you all.
Bye all. That was a lot of great information. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.